Hey everybody, Brian here again, continuing this educational series on my new drum mapping language, or syntax if you wish. Previous video we looked at how to map logic to Get Good Drums. Now we're going to look at mapping Get Good Drums to EZDrummer 3. So just like in the previous video, the first step is to just open the script. Here I have the script, Get Good Drums to EZDrummer 3 example. So I open that up, and first we'll pay attention to the CC related data that we'll specify in the script. And going to the user guide, there I have some information about Get Good Drums as well as a whole bunch of other libraries. So Get Good Drums internally, this is how it uses CC values to match up to its closed to open levels. There are 5 levels in Get Good Drums. So these levels here are exactly what I'm just showing here in this comments block. And then the CC ranges source variable, it contains 7 levels. That's just so that between libraries we can use some baseline level. It makes it very easy to do this kind of mapping from any library to any other once you have that kind of baseline. So 7 levels. So the question is how to take 5 actual Get Good Drums levels and define 7. Well, we say the first level is the most closed kind of level, so we'll just have that be the tight tip from Get Good Drums. And then we tend to think of levels 1 through 3 as closed-ish kind of levels. So let's just have level 2 and 3 be this closed tip in Get Good Drums. And then from 4 onward, we think of those as being the open levels, with 7 being the most open. So that's why we have level 7 as the open 3 level in Get Good Drums. That's where it maxes out in its openness. And then level 4, we have that being the first open level in Get Good Drums. And then levels 5 and 6, we kind of have those being a mix of several levels. So level 5, we'll say that'll be Get Good Drums open 1 or open 2. Level 6, that'll be open 2 or open 3. And obviously there are a number of ways you could do this. So this is just one way I think makes logical sense. But feel free to take a different approach. Now, something super important to mention about Get Good Drums is a really weird way it handles the hi-hat CC controller. So by default, it looks like it's number 66. This is what I always notice in Kontakt. I don't know if it's a glitch or if this is just how it's supposed to be in Get Good Drums. I tend to change that to 4 whenever I'm using Get Good Drums. But in any case, say you had Get Good Drums MIDI parts, you have a ton of CC data for the hi-hat control, it was number 66. So that's what I'm showing here, some HH control data, number 66. Well, you could easily just go to the event list in Logic and then choose all that control data and just set it to 4, to the foot control, what it should be. And there, now we have it to foot control, and then when we go back to the script, then that way things are in order because we've specified number 4 here, and in the target we also have 4. So these need to map up 4 in one, 4 in the other. We specified the CC data for the source for Get Good Drums. Now we do the same thing for EZDrummer 3. So if we go to the user guide in my section under EZDrummer 3, under hi-hats, here is how EZDrummer 3 internally uses its CC values to control the closed and open levels. There are 8 of them. So these values are exactly what you're seeing here. And all I've done here is I've gone from 8 levels to 7, so that we have that baseline that I mentioned earlier, which lets us easily go from one level in a source library to the same level in the target library. So some decisions to make in that kind of case. Here I've said, okay, level 1 is going to be the same as it was in EZDrummer 3. It'll be that closed tight. Level 2 will be the HH closed in EZDrummer 3. Level 0 will also stay the same, as will the full open and the open 4, as well as open 1 stays the same. And all I've done here for this level 5 is I've said, okay, let's have that correspond to EZDrummer 3, open 2 or open 3. So open 2 and 3 are here. That's why you see me specifying 30 to 89 down here. Make sense? Like I said, there are many ways to go about these kinds of X number of levels to Y number of levels. This is just one way I thought made sense. And then EZDrummer 3 has snare position control. Get Good Drum does not have that, but we can specify it in the CC ranges target. EZDrummer 3, 0 to 79, those correspond to snare center hits, and then 80 to 127 correspond to snare edge. The next step is to set up the so-called source articulation list. So in this case, the source is Get Good Drums. And here are all of its articulations. I think there are 31 articulations in Get Good Drums. And these are exactly what are shown here in the invasion preset. Though I think I may have specified this choke to be E3. I noticed when I was first setting up Get Good Drums, if I loaded invasion, it didn't show a note for choke. But in any case, these are how I have Get Good Drums set up. And you'll just have to make sure that however it's set up in your instance of Get Good Drums, that these notes correspond to how you specify them here. And you can specify the note name like so, C0, or you could just specify a note number if you wanted to. So C0, I think that's what, 36 or 24, whatever the actual number is. So there's some flexibility in how you write those entries. Key is to make sure what you have here is exactly captured here. Next, we move on to the user-defined notes. In this case, I'm specifying snare flam, snare ruff, snare roll. Get Good Drums does not have these articulations, and neither does EZDrummer 3, but we can still consider them as Get Good Drums notes that'll trigger these kind of sounds in EZDrummer 3, and I'll show you how to do that kind of mapping in a bit. Likewise, you could add user-defined cymbals you want to use to trigger certain types of hits in the target library or miscellaneous other kind of notes. A lot of flexibility here, and the script handles these ultimately the same way as anything in this source articulation list. Whatever you add here just gets added to this list. And if you know which notes are unused, you could specify those notes here, or you could just leave them blank like so. Likewise with the others, and the script would just figure out which unused notes are available. But I'll keep those as they were. Now we set up the target articulation list. So in EZDrummer 3, the easiest way to see this kind of information is you go to Settings, EDrums, MIDI in, and then here click on Mapping. And then you can just go through every single instrument in the kit, starting from kick, and then you see it has this hit, which is note number 36, or you could view note number and the key, so 36 or C1. So I've specified C1 here. I could have also specified 36 and that would work, but I'm just specifying the MIDI note names as such. And then you just go through every other one. Here are the snare articulations, so I've written all those out. And hi-hat, there are quite a bit. And again, they're all written out. Same thing with toms, then the rides, crashes, China splash, and then these shake a tambourine and one shot. And so everything that is included in EZDrummer 3, and here I'm using its tune track standard map, those are all written out here in this variable T. And some kits may vary, so just make sure whatever kit you're using in EZDrummer 3 that you know what its articulations are. For instance, with my particular kit, I know that this crash 1 and crash 2, those are sort of in the left of the stereo field, 3 and 4 are more towards the right, so that kind of knowledge helps with the mapping later. Now having done all of that initial setup, we're ready to actually do the mapping itself. So in Get Good Drums, there's a kick hit. In EZDrummer 3, there's one kick hit, so that's a pretty easy mapping, just a 1-to-1. Now with Get Good Drums, its snare implementation is really weird. So for velocities of 0 to 79, or I guess from 1 to 79, that's going to be a snare, normal kind of hit, and then anything above 79 is actually a rim shot. At least that's in the Architects kit and Get Good Drums. Other kits might have different crossovers. So you just want to check with the kit, make sure you know where it switches to the rim shot. So that's what this vel switch parameter does. It says if there's a Get Good Drums snare hit and its velocity is between 0 and 79, then trigger in EZDrummer 3 either a snare center or a snare edge, and those will be chosen randomly. So these in EZDrummer 3 are just its normal, typical snare hits, and then in EZDrummer 3, it'll play back as a rim shot if in Get Good Drums there's a snare hit with velocities between 80 and 127. So we're doing some velocity switching there, and that guarantees that all is well with snares and Get Good Drums translating over to EZDrummer. And then with the cross stick, Get Good Drums snare cross stick, we're having that mapped to EZDrummer 3's snare side stick or snare rim only, because that snare rim only hit sounds a little bit like a side stick. So that's a one to several mapping. If you wanted this regular side stick to happen more often, then you just use the likelihood of occurrence weights that the script supports. So if we did a :3, then this regular side stick will be chosen 3 times more often than that rim-only shot. Or you could just get rid of that rim-only shot, don't even map it, and just do it like so. But I'll put it back to how I had it. Now these next 3 entries involve a little bit of magic. So even though Get Good Drums doesn't have these articulations, we added them to the user-defined list of articulations, and then we can trigger these kind of sounds in EZDrummer using this flam, etc. parameter. So in this case, we have flam, etc., and it's specified as flam. Here, we're specifying ruff, and then here, roll. That means in your Get Good Drums MIDI, you could add these kind of notes, and then they'll trigger these kind of sounds in EZDrummer 3. And it'll trigger them using EZDrummer 3's snare center and snare edge hits. And in the GUI, you can control some aspects of that. And we'll test that later. Now onto the part of drum mapping that's always the trickiest and most overlooked. So the hi-hats. Get Good Drums has 1 hi-hat trigger, this HHCC. EZDrummer 3 has 2, a tip trigger and an edge trigger. So what this says is anytime you have a Get Good Drums HH trigger, play that back either as an EZDrummer tip trigger or an edge trigger, and look at CC number 4 to figure out what kind of data to pass on to EZDrummer 3. So in this case, it'll just do a translation. So values between 0 and 25 will translate into EZDrummer either as a 126 or 127. And likewise with these other entries, think of this as a translation table. And then if you weren't using the trigger note in Get Good Drums, you're using these open 1, 2, or 3 notes, well, we treat those a little bit differently, but this still makes perfect sense. What's happening here, if there's an open 1, that's either going to trigger the EZDrummer 3 tip or edge trigger, but it's going to assign an AID of 4 or 5. What does that mean? We're not actually using AIDs, articulation IDs, the way Logic uses them, but the way this works is it says, okay, if there's an HH open 1 hit, then let's look at the CC ranges variable above. In one of these open 1 hits in Get Good Drums, that's occupying level 4 or 5. That was a result of us going from 5 levels in Get Good Drums to 7 baseline levels. And so by using that AID assign parameter, it's going to then look at those corresponding entries 4 and 5 in the CC ranges target table and choose some CC value to then send on to EZDrummer so that it does its hi-hat control correctly. Does that make sense? It might be a little confusing at first. And then likewise with this HH Open 2, I'm using AID assign 5 or 6 because an HH Open 2 in Get Good Drums, that was occupying either level 5 or 6. And likewise with that Get Good Drums HH Open 3, that's occupying level 6 or 7. So that's why we have these corresponding entries here. So for Open 1, that was levels 4 or 5. Get Good Drums Open 2, that's level 5 or 6. Get Good Drums Open 3, that's level 6 or 7. And collectively, these make sure open levels translate over to EZDrummer 3 with the right kind of CC data being sent over to make that all happen properly. With the tight and close articulations on the edge and tip hits in Get Good Drums, those map over 1-to-1 in EZDrummer 3. So to Get Good Drums edge tight, that maps up to EZDrummer 3, tight edge close going to close edge, and likewise with these others. So that's straightforward enough. Get Good Drums HH pedal articulation, that seems to be like a pedal close articulation. So that maps to EZDrummer 3's HH pedal closed. There's no pedal splash hit as far as I can tell in Get Good Drums 3, which is why I'm not mapping to a pedal splash sound in EZDrummer 3. And then this EZDrummer 3 X has hit, there are several ways you can go about that. You could just ignore it, not even map it. But I find it sort of sounds a little bit like a EZDrummer 3 open tip 4 or open tip 5 articulation. So that's what I have here. A Get Good Drums X hats hit in EZDrummer 3 will trigger either the open tip 4 or open tip 5. Now we're moving on to the toms in the mapping. Now Get Good Drums only has one kind of tom hit. EZDrummer 3 has a center hit, a rim shot, rim only. So we have to make some decisions on what to do about that kind of situation. And luckily the script has all sorts of possibilities. So one is to say use an AID switch. So you have some tom 3 hit, and if it doesn't have an AID of 3 or 4, then it'll play back as a regular center hit. If it has an AID of 3, it'll play back as a rim shot. If it has an AID of 4, then it'll be a rim only. And so these would be like any other Logic articulations. You can just assign them to any notes, and that's how that would work. Another way is you could use velocity switching. So let's say you wanted to have higher velocities be the rim shot and rim only. That's how you would do that. And another way is just to have one Get Good Drums hit mapped to all the possible EZDrummer hits. So tom 3 hit randomly we map to either a tom center, a rim shot, or a rim only. And you can use likelihoods of occurrence. So if you want the tom center hits to be 2 times more likely, let me uncomment this so it's more visible. So that's what that kind of mapping would look like. And when we get into the test, I'll show you how all these work. So I chose floor tom 2 here and EZDrummer 3 because this is its lowest pitch tom, and that matches up with the Get Good Drums lowest pitch tom, which is the tom 3. And then tom 2 and Get Good Drums, I have that mapping to either the floor tom 1 center or the rack tom 3 center in EZDrummer 3, because those ones are the mid-pitched toms. And here with the AID switch, I'm doing the same thing I was doing up here. In this case, either floor tom 1 or tom 3 rim shot if the AID is 3. So this is also a random selection. Same way this target note works, it's just that it's working based on the AID switch. And if you don't have an AID, then the target note is the default that gets played back. And likewise with the tom 1 hit, which is the highest pitch tom hit. So in EZDrummer 3, the tom 2, tom 1, those are higher pitch toms. So this way we're mapping 3 Get Good Drums toms to 5 in EZDrummer 3. Now with rides, we have Get Good Drums ride crash that maps readily to EZDrummer ride edge, and then the ride bows obviously match up with one another. Same with the bell, and same with the choke. So a Get Good Drums choke note can trigger an EZDrummer 3 ride muted hit, and this choke's parameter says for this source choke note, here are the source notes that it chokes: crash, bow, and bell. Crash, bow, bell. And then set vel. This is for libraries like EZDrummer 3 where its mute hits are one shots basically, but if the velocity is under, in this case for EZDrummer 3, if it's under 35 or so, then you don't hear that attack in the choke. So it sounds like a more natural choke when choking a ringing cymbal. That's optional, you don't have to use that, but I find this is a better implementation of choking using EZDrummer 3's choke note. Now EZDrummer 3 also supports aftertouch choking, channel, and poly aftertouch. So ideally that's what you would use. So you could just type out :PT, and then in that case this choke note will be ignored, as will the set velocity parameter, and it would just use poly aftertouch for the choking. But I'm going to keep it as it was, and then in the testing part of this video I'll show you how you can make those changes in the GUI. So without using the : syntax, so :AT for channel aftertouch or :PT for poly aftertouch, this just means the choke method is using a choke note. And then Get Good Drums main left hit, well in EZDrummer 3, crash 1 and 2 are kind of in the left part of the stereo field, so that's why I have this one Get Good Drums left hit mapping to either a EZDrummer 3 crash 1 or crash 2, including the bow hits of those. And like I mentioned above for toms, because we have a situation of the target library having additional articulations, you have to decide how you want to handle that. One way was using that AID switch that I mentioned, as well as using velocity switches. So for now I'm just going to use a one to several mapping. And likewise with the main left choke, in this case because the main left hit here can map an EZDrummer 3 to a crash 1 or a crash 2. Here we have to specify the target note as the crash 1 muted hit or the crash 2 muted hit. And the script will figure out all of that automatically, which choke note actually has to be played depending on which cymbal was hit previously. And everything I mentioned here applies. So in this case, chokes, we specify crash main left hit because that's what that chokes. And again, that set vel parameter, which will be used for the other subsequent cymbal entries involving choking. Exactly the same idea with this main right hit. So I'm assigning that to EZDrummer's crash 3. And then likewise with the Get Good Drums wide right hit, that's going to map to EZDrummer crash 4. So in EZDrummer 3, crash 3 and 4 are kind of to the right side in the stereo field, which is why I decided to map it this way. Get Good Drums right-ish hits going to EZDrummer 3 rightish hits. And likewise with this choke note. In this case, crash wide right choke, that chokes this crash wide right hit. And I think I forgot to mention with the crash main right choke, that's choking this crash main right hit. See how that works? Parameter choke specifies the source note that chokes or the source notes, as was the case in this main left hit. And Gecko Drums has some additional symbols as a China hit, a mini China hit. EZDrummer 3 has only one China hit, so I decided to use a mapping of this sort so that if there's a Gecko Drums China or mini China hit, in EZDrummer 3 it'll play back as the China crash or the China bow. And if you wanted to use articulation IDs instead to get this China bow in the game, well, you've seen above how to do that. And likewise with the chokes, because I specified 2 hits here, I'm also specifying their choke notes and what they choke. And this can seem confusing when doing these kind of mappings, but the script works it all out automatically. So in EZDrummer 3, regardless of what kind of China hit was played and what kind of choke note was seen on the source side, in EZDrummer 3 all will play back correctly because we specified the chokes parameter as it needs to be in the target notes. And likewise with the splash hit. Now in EZDrummer 3 there's no splash bow as there are with the other cymbal hits, so in this case it's a pretty straightforward. A Gecko Drum splash hit triggers in EZDrummer 3 the splash crash, and then the splash choke in Gecko Drums, that triggers the splash muted hit in EZDrummer 3, and again using the chokes parameter to say what it is choking, and with the set val parameter. Now here we're not mapping to any EZDrummer 3 tambourine, shaker, cowbell, those kind of hits, because in Gecko Drums there aren't those kind of articulations to map to. And then lastly here we're specifying EZDrummer 3's pedal close and pedal open notes. Those are so that in the GUI, under the detection of hi-hat, pedal close, and pedal splash, that it'll know which notes to trigger when those kind of detections are made. And I'll show you that during the testing part of the video. So that's it for the mapping. I know some of it might seem confusing, but once you've done a few of these, like I said, this language just starts to seep in and it all starts making sense. So let's move on to testing it all. Now with the mapping all done out of the way, you just hit run script and you'll know you had a successful validated map. If you see this message, successfully validated source to target mapping. And you also have visual feedback that went well if in the GUI you see this show advanced stuff option. Now if we had a mistake somewhere, so I just added the number 4 into that note name here, hit run script. Now the advanced options checkbox vanished. Now we see there are errors. We can't proceed until errors are fixed. And it tells us the exact nature of that error, where it is. So we fix that, hit run script. Now show advanced stuff reappeared. We know all is well. There are warnings, but they're not showstoppers. We're being told that there are source articulations that are not mapped. And in this case, remember we entered these user-defined notes for Gecko Drums, but we're not using them, so we're getting a warning. And also a warning about articulations in EZDrummer 3 that are not mapped to, mostly these HH, these hi-hat related articulations. But the fact is they are mapped to, just in an indirect way. Remember we use these HH triggers in EZDrummer 3. So all of this action here with using HH triggers, using the AID assign, making sure the right kind of CC data is sent on to EZDrummer 3, that'll actually result in EZDrummer 3 triggering, playing back these samples. So this warning is a little misleading. Don't worry about it. After creating a map, I always like to do a series of tests to make sure all is well. So in this case, there are certain nuances we want to make sure that are happening correctly. So with the snare hits, remember Gecko Drums is very weird when it comes to snares. We're going to test that first. Notice the first 3 hits were regular snare hits in EZDrummer 3, then we heard the rim shots. That's because we're using that velocity switch, where from 0 to 79 we were hearing the center and edge hits in EZDrummer 3. See these entries, need to set articulation based on velocity, and then we see which articulation in EZDrummer 3 was being triggered. So first the centers or edges, and then the rim shots. That's what you're seeing here. And then above 80, or 80 and above, that was the rim shot. So see those velocities all above 80. These ones all below. Now we're going to test the generation of flam, ruff, and rolls. In the script window, you also see some output to what was going on. Here we see these lines about source articulation, snare flam, triggering, snare flam, and start lever, etc., for the ruff and the roll. Remember, those articulations don't exist in Gecko Drums or EZDrummer 3. We use these user-defined snare notes. You'll see that if you check on Show Advanced Stuff and then click on User Snare Notes. And so here are these A-1, A sharp -1, B-1. We can control some aspects of that sound, especially for the rolls. We can control its timing and velocity variation. So if we set those way up and say set its speed way down. So a lot of variation there, both in timing and velocity. If we set the speed way up, that's that kind of sound. If we set the timing and velocity variation way down, let's put this back in the middle. That's just a very boring roll kind of sound without any humanness to it. And we can adjust the flam and ruff speed. So if we want those to be quicker sounding, you can slow them down. And you can change these notes if you wanted to, but be sure to change it to a note that's truly available. Like for instance, if we tried to change this snare roll to be an A-1, we're going to be told that that's a no-go because A-1 is already used by the snare flam. We have a message at that point to that effect. So we could change that roll note to say a G-1, which is an available note. Move this down to G-1. You can always go back to defaults by hitting this reset to defaults. And everything's back to the way it was. And obviously we need to test that everything's okay with the hi-hats. So this first test we're looking at Get Good Drums. It's F-1 note, it's HHCC trigger with accompanying foot control data going through with the 7 levels that we defined. So remember we set up these levels. So what we're seeing here are CC values covering each of 7 levels. And then we hit play. And there you heard things transitioning from full close to full open. And you also see some output in the script window, which is always a good way to confirm that things were going to plan. So in this case, each time there's a CC value here in Get Good Drums, it was being translated to some value for EZDrummer 3. Remember we talked about this as being like a translation table from one to the other. So in each case you see lines such as CC number 4 value such and such corresponds to some level in the target library. And that's all based on what you have here. So here we can think of this as CC translation. That's one way to get hi-hats to work correctly. Now another way, let's say we don't have foot control data. Let's say you wanted to use articulation IDs on the logic side. I'm not sure why you would do that, but the script can handle it. So let's say you had this Get Good Drums part and it had articulation IDs for these F-1 notes. Here they are, 1 through 7. So we hit play. And we heard that it sounded correct, going from full close to open. And once again, we have some kind of visual confirmation here in this window. In this case, the script is looking at the AID that was assigned to the note, and based on that AID, it's sending CC data. So here for AID 7, for instance, we're going to see a value sent to EZDrummer 3 between 0 and 7. And that's what we're seeing here, sent a value of 6, and so on for all the other notes. And on the EZDrummer 3 side, either the tip trigger or the edge trigger was being used, because remember, that's how we set up the mapping. So those two tests make sure all is well when you have the HHCC trigger on Get Good Drums side. And now we can test some of these individual one-to-one mappings, where you had these Get Good Drums edge and tip tight closed articulations, which are playing back as a corresponding note in EZDrummer 3. So we can see that here with these 4 notes. So these 4 here are these 4. So all sounds well, and as always, I want to see that all looks well as well. And we see that here, a Get Good Drums tight tip mapping up to an HH tight tip in EZDrummer 3, and the other 3 being mapped correctly as well. And then likewise, we have these open 1, 2, and 3 notes in Get Good Drums, and we use some trickery, remember, to get those to play back in EZDrummer, going through its tip or edge trigger, assigning AIDs, and then sending over to EZDrummer 3 the right kind of CC data to make that all work like magic. So that's what these 3 notes are here. These. So hit play. And we see that all was well. That's what this is all about. Assign AID randomly. So we saw an AID of 5 was assigned for one note, then for another 5 again, and then 6 as well, which we would expect because that first note could trigger level 4 or 5, The second note could trigger 5 or 6, so that's why we saw AID 5 twice here. And then this HH open 3, that can correspond to level 6 or 7, which is why we saw level 6 here. So that's all according to the mapping. And then remember, we have this X cross hit in Get Good Drums, but that sounds similar to certain notes in EZDrummer 3. So we can confirm that's working out just fine. I'm just hitting this note a few times. And then in the output, you see that sometimes an open tip 4 and an open tip 5 is being played back in EZDrummer 3. And then moving on to toms. Remember I talked about how to deal with these situations where in the source library you have some articulations, and then in the target you have additional articulations. So first let's just consider the case where we're using an AID switch. So with these tom hits here, the first 3 don't have any articulation ID assigned, and then we have AID 3 and 4 assigned to these 3 and these 3. So I'll play that back. So that's according to the mapping. That's what we accomplished with these entries. When there was no AID, we were hearing the regular tom 2 center, and then we heard the rim shot and rim only hits. So there we were seeing the AID switch in effect. And all sounded well there. We heard the regular tom hits, and then the rim shots, and then the rim onlys. And we see information about the AIDs. And so those AIDs being used there. And when there was no AID, then it just defaults. And that's when you were hearing this floor tom 2 center. And now we could also confirm that velocity-based switching is working fine. Now we'll hit run script. It doesn't matter if we didn't uncomment this, so this overdoes what's above it. So now we go to this test here where I've just written out various velocities. So here these ones are in the 90s. And then these ones are above 100 or so, above 115 or so. And then these last ones are in the 120s. So in that case, we also see the results. Note these entries need to set articulation based on velocity. So this was the velocity-based switching going on. And now we can test rides. This is pretty straightforward. The main thing we want to look for is that it all is well with the choking. So I'll hit play. So we heard the choking happening correctly. And remember, we talked about this set vel parameter, because for this choke test first, we're using this method of target choke note. So a choke note in Get Good Drums is generating choking in the target library using the target library's corresponding choke note. And let's say we did not use this set vel parameter. Run script, and now hit play. So you heard the attack of the cymbal as well as the attack of the choke. And I think you'll agree it's better when we use this set vel parameter. And now if there's a cymbal hit and the choke note occurs considerably long afterwards, then that choke note will play back as a one hit. So here we have a cymbal, a long delay, and then the choke note. So in this case, this is going to play as a one shot. But when that note is closely preceded by a cymbal, then you have proper choking. And Get Good Drums supports other choking methods as well. You can use channel aftertouch. That chokes here. You can use poly aftertouch. Now in these two cases, we're not even sending a choke note to EZDrummer 3. In EZDrummer 3, the duration of this note will determine the duration of the choking. So notice that was a longer duration choke. Now I would say any target library that does support aftertouch as a choking method, you may as well choose that. And these two entries here, I'm not going to test right now. These just say if you don't have a choke note from the target, say you have poly aftertouch or channel aftertouch, then how to handle that kind of input data. And it's the same deal. You just decide what kind of method in the target you want to use. But Get Good Drums, I don't expect you're going to have aftertouch data that was used for choking there. So that's why I'm not addressing it here. But you might. And if you do, well, you know how to handle it. And here you can manage your user-defined notes as well, which we weren't using. And then likewise with the crash cymbals, we can do a couple tests. Remember, we were mapping Get Good Drums crash main left hit to one of several possible notes in EZDrummer 3. So that's what this first test is going to do. So you heard different types of articulations being played back. And you see those results here as well. So So that one note in Get Good Drums in EZDrummer 3 was sometimes mapping to a crash 2 bow, sometimes a crash 1, sometimes a crash 1 crash, etc. Okay, so now we're going to use velocity switching. I uncommented this out, hit run script, and now we hit play. So we heard the velocity switching is working correctly, and output to that effect. Now notice we're only seeing the messages about needing to set articulation based on velocity for those entries that had a velocity below 99. Because otherwise what the script does, it just uses this target note as a default. So when we hit these notes, we didn't see those messages, only when we hit these notes that hit the lower velocities. And we can test some of the additional cymbals and their choking as well. That's what these entries are here. Here we're just going to play back these Get Good Drums China, Mini China, and Splash hits, along with their choke notes. And that was all working correctly. And as we did in the previous test, you can change the method being used. So we just heard poly aftertouch being used in EZDrummer 3. You can switch that to a target choke note. And then one other thing to test is the auto detection of HH pedal closed and splashes. So we'll open up the script. Under advanced stuff, make sure you choose both for HH pedal settings. In this case, it's channel 1, CC4. So make sure these correspond to whatever kind of data you have. And we'll hit play. And in the output, you see what was going on. We'll be notified when a pedal chick was detected or a splash. There are also some other details on their duration. And we also see what note was being sent to EZDrummer 3 in reaction to these events. So when a chick is detected, the HH pedal chick note in EZDrummer 3 is triggered, and likewise if a splash was detected. And remember, those are the notes that we defined here. And in the GUI, you can also control that. So these are the EZDrummer 3 notes that are being triggered in reaction to these kind of detections. And you can change that. So we pretty much confirmed that it's a good mapping, and what I like to do afterwards is just play back some real world drum part. Here we have a drum part from Get Good Drums. And now because I know the mapping is validated, I'm going to click off these show console output, also click that off so we don't see any kind of debug info. And now we can play back some part that was done in Get Good Drums, and now we have complete playback in EZDrummer 3. And we weren't seeing any output here because we had everything disabled. And if we check that off, playback again, then you would see output. And now you would see what's happening with every single mapping. But like I said, when you have a validated mapping, there's no need to do that because that takes up CPU resources. So when you're confident all is well, just turn that off and you'll be good to go. So that was that. Hopefully that made sense. If it didn't, just leave some comments and I can maybe clarify something. The key is to just have some practice with this. It's a new language, and like any other language, you just need to use that language to get fluent. So till next time.